Akira Kurosawa. You have probably heard of the name before, as Kurosawa is one of the most highly acclaimed Japanese directors, if not the most highly acclaimed Japanese director of all time. His works have been incredibly influential and important to the medium of film, inspiring not only Japanese cinema, but world cinema as well. If you have any interest in cinema or Japanese cinema, you have likely seen or at least heard of some of his films before. Today, Kurosawa is most well known for his timeless samurai films like The Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, and Ran, with these films being some of his most celebrated and critically acclaimed films. Although Kurosawa has such great films as the ones I have just mentioned, Kurosawa also has a wealth of other equally excellent films under his belt, from his earlier works like Stray Dogs and The Drunken Angel, to some of his later works like Dreams and Kagemusha. Kurosawa was always able to prove that he was a master of cinema no matter the decade. While Kurosawa is a widely beloved and highly acclaimed director, the fame didn't always get him what he wanted to make his films. After Kurosawa had made the film Redbeard in 1965, his exclusive contract with Toho was over and he was free to pursue other directing jobs outside of Toho. Kurosawa began looking into these different offers as his relationship with Toho had become increasingly strained over the years with regards to the budgets on Kurosawa's films. Kurosawa wanted bigger and bigger budgets for his films, and Toho was seeing his projects as becoming increasingly risky investments for them. This led Kurosawa to having to finance a good chunk of the budget for his own films. Even though Kurosawa had given Toho a number of hits, it didn't matter to Toho, and it was becoming obvious to Kurosawa that he would have to look elsewhere to get his projects funded. After Kurosawa had broken out of Japan and into the international market with his films in the 1950s, he had gotten more and more attention and offers to direct for international productions all around the world, none of which he could take at the time because of his exclusive contract with Toho. This contract, however, wouldn't be much of a problem anymore since it was ending, and those offers became extremely appealing, especially with the decline of the Japanese film industry at the time and the rise of television, a medium which he could not see himself in. It was a perfect opportunity for Kurosawa. Sadly for Kurosawa, it didn't turn out to be the perfect opportunity he thought it would be. Failed project after failed project led Kurosawa back to Japan, where he would make Dodes Ka Den in 1970. This was Kurosawa's first film in colour, and he would use colour in a very stylistic way. This film would lay the groundwork for his use of colour that we would see perfected in his later films. Dodes Ka Den was made on a relatively small budget in comparison to some of Kurosawa's previous films, and Kurosawa had to mortgage his own house to fund the film. While Kurosawa had put a lot of work into the film, it didn't pay off for him. With the film being a massive box office bomb in Japan, this failure broke Kurosawa and led him into a deep depression, questioning his ability to make art, and he was uncertain if he would still make films after Dodes Ka Den's failure. Kurosawa's depression had gotten so bad that in 1971 he attempted suicide. This attempt failed and his health was able to recover, but he did not attempt any new projects for an entire year. That was until 1973, when Mosfilms threw Kurosawa a lifeline by asking him if he would like to direct a Russian film for them. This offer by Mosfilms piqued Kurosawa's interest because Mosfilms was willing to give Kurosawa almost complete creative control over whatever project he wanted to make, along with the final cut on whatever film he would make. Kurosawa had been hugely interested in Russian literature since he was a young boy, with his older brother Heigo introducing him to Russian literature. Just like how Kurosawa had used Shakespeare's Macbeth for Throne of Blood, Kurosawa had used and adapted Russian literature for some of his films as well, namely The Idiot from 1951, based on Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Kurosawa drew on his vast knowledge of Russian literature for his new project, and after some back and forth with Mosfilms, he eventually settled on adapting the book Dersu Uzala by Vladimir Arsenyev. Kurosawa had always wanted to make a film about Dersu Uzala after reading the book in the 1940s. The book really spoke to him, with Kurosawa heavily relating to a man living in harmony with nature and himself. While Kurosawa had thought about making a film about Dersu Uzala before the Mosfilms offer, he decided to scrap the project early in development due to him finding that it would need to be shot in Russia at the real locations in order to do the story justice. At the time it was impossible due to those areas of Russia being closed to most foreigners and especially foreign film crews. So this offer from Mosfilms was perfect for him, as he would be able to get access to practically any area he wanted. Kurosawa would spend a year filming in Russia, and the film he created from that year of filming is probably one of the most unique films he ever made. Unlike all of Kurosawa's other films, which were all culturally Japanese with their stories, actors, and settings, Dersu Uzala is culturally Russian, starting with its story. The story of Dersu Uzala is based on a book of the same name, and the book is about Dersu Uzala and its writer Vladimir Arsenyev's expeditions in Russia's Far East. The film starts in the year 1902 in Tsarist Russia with an expedition to survey the landscape of Russia's Far East, more specifically the region of Primory. The expedition is led by Captain Vladimir Arsenyev, a well-known Russian explorer. While making camp one night, the group of Russian soldiers happened to encounter a nomadic hunter by the name of Dersu Uzala. Dersu was easily able to find their camp by tracking their trail through the wilderness. Dersu is quite an odd person and at the start is perceived by most of the soldiers as a comical old man, but Captain Arsenyev can see he is no fool. Arsenyev sees Dersu as someone who is in tune with nature and the surrounding wilderness, almost like an extension of the forest itself. Dersu joins the expedition, helping to guide the somewhat lost expedition through the uncharted wilderness. Over the course of the expedition, Dersu gains the respect of the soldiers.
Ну что, ленте воткнули тебе перо? Собирайся, ребята, выступаем.
And proves to them that he is no crazed old halfwit, with him showing his skills in teaching the soldiers valuable lessons along the way. The expedition goes through many hardships in its journey, but it is ultimately successful thanks to Dersu's skills and navigation, along with Arsenyev's leadership. Dersu and Arsenyev go their separate ways. Thanks to the expedition and the long amount of time they spent with each other, Dersu and Arsenyev have formed a lifelong friendship, with both of them respecting each other even though they are from completely different worlds. Dersu and Arsenyev are the only two main characters of the film, and they are, for the most part, the only real characters in the film. Apart from a couple of side characters that don't get more than a couple of lines of dialogue and are ultimately just there to add to the story and background. The lack of characters is one of the main criticisms I see against the film, along with the lack of any real character development. I do somewhat agree with this criticism, as Arsenyev isn't the most interesting character, and we learn little about him or his family. We do eventually get to see his family, but it's too little, too late, with Arsenyev's family only featuring at the end of the film and not for very long. It's a similar story with Dersu, as we only learn a little bit about Dersu's life before he became this nomadic hunter, having a wife and children that were sadly killed by smallpox. The part where I disagree with this criticism is that Kurosawa didn't develop the characters at all. Instead of conventionally developing the characters individually with backstories and certain character traits, Kurosawa decided to take a different approach with developing the two characters. He developed the two characters as a pair along with their friendship over the course of the film, with the film having these little moments throughout the whole of the film slowly building up their friendship, and while it's not new or groundbreaking, it's refreshing to see. Right from the first meeting between the two, Arsenyev sees that Dersu is an intelligent and wise man, already proving himself to be a good tracker from finding their camp. Arsenyev sees his skills and not wanting to pass up the opportunity to try and get him to help guide his expedition, asks him if he would like to come along. In return, Dersu sees from the first meeting that Arsenyev is clearly a kind and competent man, listening and respecting Dersu, giving him time to think about if he wants to join or not, showing Dersu that he isn't arrogant or ignorant like the rest of his soldiers are. Even though they are completely different in race, culture, and heritage, Arsenyev can see past all of that and understand that Dersu is a valuable asset that eventually turns into a lasting friendship for the two of them. The mutual respect and friendship between the two goes a long way and is there throughout the whole film. You can see them growing closer to each other and deeply caring for each other, with Arsenyev admiring how Dersu was able to survive for so long in this harsh and hazardous wilderness, virtually untouched by man, and Dersu admiring Arsenyev's kindness and compassion towards everyone he meets. Kurosawa litters these little moments throughout the whole film, and they are great to watch. Dersu Uzala is a very slow film, with the film having quite a slow pace to it. This slow pace works in the film's favour, as you can take in the beautiful landscapes that Kurosawa was able to capture. The slow pace never seems to drag or overstay its welcome, as the film sets the slow pace very early on in the film, letting you easily get accustomed to it. Along with the film being slow, it's also quite isolating at times, especially with the scenes in the frozen tundra. Even when the film is not in the frozen tundra, the empty landscapes, far away from any civilization, create the same eerie feeling of isolation. This fact is only compounded by the lack of music in most scenes, letting you take in the environment fully. Along with the environments, Kurosawa also wanted to capture all 4 seasons of the year and have them presented in the film. It's why it took a year to shoot, because Kurosawa had to wait for each season to pass before filming the rest. Kurosawa wanted to shoot in every season because he wanted to fully take advantage of his newfound use of colour, and because of this, you can easily tell what season the expedition is in, just from the scenery alone, whether it's winter, spring, summer, or autumn. Because Kurosawa shot Dersu Uzala on 3 cameras, Mosfilm only allowed him to use poorer and cheaper Soviet film stock instead of the more expensive Fuji or Kodak film stock. This was done in order to save on the budget and led to a lot of the film's colours looking a little washed out and not 100% right. I would say this is a very minor problem, as you can still appreciate Kurosawa's use of colour for each season and see what he was trying to do. Dersu Uzala has strong themes about nature and the rapid industrialization of the world. While Russia's Far East was still heavily underdeveloped in the early 1900s, it was developing rapidly and becoming more and more industrialized. This presented a problem for people like Dersu, whose lifestyle was that of a hunter-gatherer. That type of lifestyle was slowly being eroded away by the ever-encroaching industrialized civilization, always pushing further and further into the forests. Dersu is a man who is rapidly running out of time, and we see this presented in the film. When he goes to Arsenyev's town, Dersu doesn't fit in with modern Russian society, and he is becoming too old to be out in the wild, but Dersu is too wild to be in the town. Kurosawa wanted to go back to nature, and Dersu Uzala was his way of expressing that. He saw that mankind was forgetting that they were also a part of nature, having a duty to protect and preserve it instead of constantly destroying it. I would say that Kurosawa had succeeded in taking the audience back to nature, as the way he presents nature in the film brings you right there. It helps that most of the film is shot in the actual Russian wilderness, with only small portions being shot on sound stages. A notable example of this is in the scene with Dersu, Arsenyev and the Taiga. The film has some amazing cinematography, being able to capture the beauty of the landscapes. The still wide shots allow us to take in the larger and more open environments, while the slow pans across the vast wilderness allow us to take in the sheer scale of it. While the larger shots are great, the medium shots are also well done, with the medium shots around the campfire scene providing us with a more comfortable and close-up view of the characters, allowing us to be right there with them. While there are some great shots, there are quite a few shots that feel quite flat or lifeless with how little the camera moves or just how the shot is framed. Some of the shots might be like this due to the difficulties of the location, with the crew having to shoot in tight and confined spaces in the forests. The music in Dersu Uzala takes a backseat, as was intended by Kurosawa. Kurosawa wanted the audience to hear the raw sound of nature punching through, rather than the loud and potentially distracting musical score. The musical score in the film often has the sound of nature overpowering the music in many scenes. Isaac Schwartz was the composer for the film, and he had little time to write the score due to Kurosawa almost finishing the film by the time he was able to get around to writing the score. This may be another reason for why the film has such little music. There are a couple of standout tracks from the little music there is, with certain ones having this haunting sound to them, almost like our main characters are constantly being hunted down. The parts of the film that are scored are done decently enough, especially with the music in the ending scene. The tracks do add to the film, but sometimes I wish there was a little more music given how little music there is. And there are times when you think there should be music, but there is none. In conclusion, Dersu Uzala is one of Kurosawa's most unique and controversial films, with it being a Russian film made by a Japanese director. Its exploration of nature and how man intertwines with it makes it an interesting watch and something you can admire just by viewing it. While the film isn't for everybody, it certainly has its appeal, even if it's just for its legendary director. As a side note, if you have reservations about watching an entire 2-hour film in Russian, don't fret, because it has a surprisingly good English dub, and while the original Russian is more natural, it's not a bad listen. The story and characters of Dersu Uzala may be simple, but it's the journey these characters undertake together that really brings the film together. By the end, you really feel the friendship between Dersu and Arsenyev, having seen so much of what they have been through together. Dersu Uzala would prove to be a critical success for Kurosawa, winning him an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film in 1975.
And the winner is the USSR for Dersu Uzala.
And while it's unknown how financially successful the film was, it certainly sold a lot of tickets in the Soviet Union and other countries. The film was also a revival for Kurosawa's career, bringing him back into the spotlight and helping him get back on his feet after the previous decade of disaster.